Have you ever wondered what it feels like to lose everything, yet still have to stay strong for the ones who depend on you? Clara Whitmore knew that pain all too well, a young widow on the cold trails of Montana, with 2 children shivering in the back of a worn-out wagon, and no place left to call home. 6 days after burying her husband, she had nothing left but a half-starved horse and a desperate hope that a rancher she barely knew might open his door. But what happens when a woman who's ready to sleep in a stable, just to keep her children alive, hears a cowboy say, "You'll sleep inside or not at all"? Was it pity or something deeper, something she had almost forgotten existed? If it were you tired, broken, with your children watching, would you dare to trust a stranger's kindness? Would you let yourself believe in the possibility of safety again? This is not only a story of survival, but of hope rekindled, of love slowly born in the silence of winter nights. Stay with us and see how hearts find their way home on the wild frontier. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more timeless stories to life. Montana Territory, late autumn of 1881. The sky carried a thin edge of snow as Clara Whitmore gripped the reins with raw, aching fingers, willing herself not to break down in front of her children. The old mare stumbled along the rocky creek bed, one shoe gone, ribs showing through its coat. Beside her rolled a rented wagon, driven by a ranch hand barely grown, unsure of what comfort he could offer a widow whose husband had been laid to rest only 6 days before. In the back, beneath a frayed wool blanket, Ella, 7, and Samuel, just past 5, huddled together for warmth. Their faces showed both the bite of the wind and the sorrow of Missouri left behind the fresh grave, the foreclosure, the neighbors who had turned away instead of lending a hand. "Ma," Sam whispered, voice thin as a reed. "Can we stop soon?" Clara forced a smile. "Soon, darling, I promise." She held to the only plan left to reach her cousin Agnes's old acquaintance, Jonah McAllister, who kept cattle near the Bitterroot Range. The letter she had sent weeks before had never been answered, but there was no other door to knock on. The last of her coins had gone to hire the wagon and buy 1 sack of flour. If Jonah refused them, she meant to curl up in his stable and pray the roof held against the storm. Toward evening, they topped a rise. Before them stretched a wide valley of fenced pasture and weathered barns, a cabin long and low with smoke curling from its chimney. Cattle dotted the hillsides, proof of a place alive and working. A lone rider followed the fence line, his bay horse sure-footed in the fading light. Clara pulled her mare to a halt and glanced down at her self-dust-stained skirt, split knuckles, hair loose under a bonnet crushed by travel. She looked every inch what she was a widow, with 2 hungry children and nothing else to her name. The young ranch hand cleared his throat. "That'll be him." "Want me to ride ahead?" Clara shook her head. "No, this is mine to do." The cowboy turned toward them as they drew closer. He rode with the ease of a man born in the saddle, jaw square, dark hair falling loose, eyes gray as storm clouds, steady and unreadable. Clara lifted her chin. "Mr. McAllister?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Clara Whitmore, cousin to Agnes Whitmore. You and she wrote once, years back. I sent you a letter a fortnight ago, but I never knew if it reached you." Her voice faltered. He let his gaze travel from the wagon to the children, then to the limping horse. "It didn't," he said at last, "but I reckon you had reason enough to come." Clara swallowed hard. He swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. "Bring the young ones inside. They're half frozen. I'll take the stable," she blurted. "We won't trouble you. Not more than a night or two until I sort what comes next." Jonah looked at her, then at the children, then back at her again. His voice was low and firm. "No, you'll sleep under a roof, in a warm bed. No woman with 2 children is bedding down in my barn. I don't want pity," she managed. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "It isn't pity, it's decency. And if that offends you, then you can be cross about it while you sit by my fire." Ella tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Please, Mama, I'm so cold." Clara shut her eyes a moment, then nodded. Jonah lifted Sam in one arm and took Ella's hand with the other. Clara followed them into the cabin, heart pounding. Inside, warmth and the smell of cedar wrapped around her. Jonah laid Sam down gently and pulled thick quilts from a chest. "I've only one bedroom, but it's large enough. The children take the bed. You'll have the cot. I'll stay out here." Clara started to protest, but he met her gaze and said steady, "You're not sleeping in the barn." "Clara." Her name and his voice steadied something inside her. That night, after the children drifted to sleep beneath quilts, Clara stood at the hearth, firelight painting her face, clean hands, brushed hair, a borrowed nightdress each felt like more kindness than she deserved. Jonah's voice came from behind. "You don't owe me anything?" She turned. "I don't follow. You look like you're bracing to pay for your place here. You're not." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I have nothing left. You've got 2 little ones who trust you. That's not nothing." Her eyes dropped. "My husband was a good man, but the farm broke under him. And when he passed, the bank took all we had. I had nowhere else. You've got me now," Jonah said simply. She raised her eyes, found his calm face and warm gray eyes. "Why," she whispered, "because I've watched good women break under hard years," he said, stepping nearer. "And I won't stand by and let that happen to you." Tears pricked her eyes for the first time in days. She turned her face away. "Thank you." His hand touched her shoulder, steady and gentle. "You're safe here." That night, while the wind howled and snow began to fall, Clara lay awake on the cot, listening to her children breathe and to the slow, measured footsteps of Jonah tending the fire. For the first time in years, she felt a trace of hope. Morning broke pale and hushed, the kind of silence only snowfall brings. Jonah was already gone to the yard. On the table lay a note in careful block letters. "Feed in the stock. Coffee's hot." Clara set the note back down on the rough-hewn table and wrapped her hands around the warm tin cup. Coffee steadied her more than she would admit. Through the frost-rimmed window, she watched the yard, all hushed beneath a fresh quilt of white. The world seemed to hold its breath. No wind, no sound beyond the soft drift of snow finding its place along the fence rails and brush. Ella stirred first, hair tangled from sleep, clutching a scrap of quilt like it might anchor her to this new place. She blinked at her mother and whispered, "Can we stay here today?" Clara smiled faintly and nodded. "We won't be traveling again for a while." "Sweetheart." The girl accepted the answer without another word, simply sliding from the bed and padding toward the hearth. Sam woke not long after, his cheeks still pink from the warmth of sleep. Clara helped both children into their clothes, smoothing fabric worn thin by use. She set before them the last of the cornbread from the night before, and they ate while snowlight filtered through the single window. By the time Jonah came in from the yard, his shoulders were brushed white with snow, and his boots carried the weight of drifts. The children had been drawing shapes in the gray ash of the hearth with bits of kindling. Jonah tapped his boots clean outside, then hung his coat on the peg by the door. "Barn roof is holding," he said evenly as he pulled off his gloves. "Horses will be all right for the day." Clara looked up from the fire. "Can I help? I can cook, mend, whatever's needed." Jonah's eyes softened, though his voice stayed plain. "There'll be time for that, just not today." She hesitated, unused to idleness. "Then what should I do?" He regarded her a long moment before answering. "Rest, get warm, learn what it feels like to be still again." She did not know how to answer, so she said nothing. He must have seen the confusion in her eyes, because he turned away and busied himself with the kettle. "After breakfast, I'll be hauling hay to the north shelter," he said. "If you want to walk the land later, I can show you." Clara found herself saying, softer than intended, "I'd like that." The morning passed quietly. Clara swept the plank floor, shook out bedding near the door, and let the fresh, cold air chase away the heaviness of travel. The children amused themselves with a tobacco tin Jonah had filled with old buttons. They arranged them in rows, built little towers, and knocked them down again, giggling softly. Jonah worked at a loose hinge on the cupboard, then sat by the hearth sharpening a knife. Neither felt the need to crowd silence with chatter. The air between them carried a calm she hadn't known in months. Near midday, Clara stepped onto the porch and stood beneath the eaves, watching snow melt drip in slow beads. Jonah joined her, his coat slung over one arm. He handed it to her without ceremony. "You'll need this." She slipped into the coat, the fabric too large but carrying the scent of pine smoke and horse. They walked the edge of the pasture together, boots crunching on the frozen crust. He pointed out where the cattle favored bedding, where the slope caught morning light, where the fence needed mending come spring. After a while he spoke, voice low. "I came out here after the war. Never figured to stay long, maybe a season." She glanced at him, and yet 12 years have gone by. He rested a hand on a post, because this land asked nothing but work. Out here, I could breathe. I didn't owe anyone a thing. Clara understood in her bones. Missouri had left her tethered to debts and expectations, all stripped away by loss. Here, the horizon asked only labor and resolve. Jonah faced her then. "You and the children can stay through winter. After that, we'll see what you want." Her breath caught. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. She found no strength to argue. They walked back side by side, close enough she could feel the heat from his arm through the heavy coat. That evening, when the children were tucked beneath quilts, Ella whispered, "I like it here. Mama." Clara kissed her forehead and answered softly, "I know. Love." In the main room, Jonah sat carving a new handle for his skinning knife, the firelight tracing hard lines across his jaw. Clara lingered near the flames. "I can take the cot again," she offered. "It's yours for as long as you need it," he said without looking up. She stepped closer, drawn by the steadiness in his voice. "You don't ask many questions." He set the blade aside. "You look like someone who's already been asked too many." Her throat tightened, and she only nodded. After a pause, he added, "You're not the only one who's lost." She sat across from him, the fire between them. What did you lose? He tested the edge of the blade before answering. A brother, and the man I used to be. The room grew quiet, the fire snapping low. Outside, moonlight stretched silver across the fields. Clara let her gaze drift to the window. Jonah pressed for no further words. He didn't need to. In his quiet presence, she found not rescue, not charity, but recognition. Weeks passed. Snow hardened into a crust that carried a man's weight. Jonah took Sam into the yard and showed him how to read rabbit tracks pressed into the white. Ella found a slate tucked behind old ledgers and practiced letters by the stove, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Clara, with steadier hands, stitched a patch into the elbow of one of Jonah's shirts. "You've got a knack for it," Jonah remarked one evening, oiling a bridle without looking up. "I used to mend for neighbors back home, mostly Sunday clothes." He leaned the leather against his knee. "Town's schoolhouse hasn't had a teacher since spring. I reckon you could fill that place. I haven't a certificate. Neither did the last one. Preacher's wife. She could read and keep order, that was enough." Clara paused in her stitching. The widow, Pratt. He nodded. She moved to Helena with her boy. Folks never replaced her. Clara folded the shirt and set it carefully in the basket. "I don't know if I'm ready to teach again. What held you back before I married at 18? Never finished training." Jonah checked the buckle on the strap. "You're older now. Smarter, too, I'd guess." She didn't laugh, but her mouth softened. "I'd be frightened. Being scared means you'd take it seriously," he said, voice plain. The wind outside had quieted, leaving only the sound of the fire. Clara poured water into the kettle and let the silence stretch. For the first time in years, she felt she might not be defined by what she had lost. Jonah leaned back in his chair. "This land can be harsh, but it doesn't close its door to someone willing to work. Neither do I." Clara looked at him, really looked the weathered planes of his face, the quiet steadiness in his gray eyes. She thought of Ella curled over her slate, of Sam laughing at rabbit tracks, of the hush that had settled over her own spirit. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she allowed herself to imagine a life that was more than mere survival, a life where she could be still, and perhaps even belong. The fire hissed softly as Clara poured more water into the kettle, the steam rising in pale ribbons. The children were drifting toward sleep. Sam curled near the hearth, and Ella with her slate tablet balanced against her lap. Outside, the wind had slowed, leaving the night startlingly still. Clara lingered a moment, staring at the flames, before asking the question that had pressed at her since their arrival. "Did you ever want a family of your own?" Jonah took the cup she handed him and stared into the fire. "Once," he said after a long silence. She waited, not pushing, letting him find the words in his own time. "There was a girl back in Kentucky," he said finally. "Her father kept a dry goods store. We talked about going west together, building something of our own, but then I signed up when the war came. She didn't wait. Married my cousin instead." Clara's breath caught, not in judgment but in recognition of how loss reshapes a life. Jonah's face stayed steady in the glow of the fire. "I don't blame her," he added. "I came back hard and quiet, not fit for anyone for a long while." Clara sat back down, her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup. "Grief does that," she said softly. "It makes a person sharp at the edges, not because they mean to be cruel, but because they're still bleeding inside. Jonah lifted his gaze. And you still bleeding less than I was. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Clara looked at her children, sleeping soundly, one with a shawl tucked over him, the other with chalk dust on her hands. Her voice was low when she answered, I can't promise much, but I know I don't want to keep running. Jonah studied her face, his gray eyes as steady as stone. You don't have to. She held his gaze, really looking at him, at the rough planes of his features, the kind that didn't shift with weather or worry. You've been kind, she whispered. I didn't do it to be remembered for it. I know. He rose then, moving to kneel beside the children. With surprising gentleness, he lifted Sam into his arms and carried the boy to the bed, tucking him in beside his sister without disturbing her. When he turned back, Clara was still standing, watching him. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked. I sleep enough. She took a step closer. You don't have to carry the silence alone. His gaze met hers, unflinching. You offering to share it, I think I am. His hand reached for hers, not a grand gesture, but something quieter, steadier. Their fingers folded together as though they had always belonged that way. They stood in the glow of the hearth, shadows falling softly around them. You'll take the bed tonight, he said. She didn't argue. Later, when the fire burned low and the wind outside settled into a hush, Clara lay beside her children, the cot empty for the first time. From the main room she could hear Jonah's breathing quiet, even reassuring. She closed her eyes and let that sound carry her into sleep. Not because exhaustion claimed her, but because for the first time in years she knew she would wake to something worth holding. The thaw came slow. Water trickled from the eaves, steady as a heartbeat. Ice pulled back from the creek, the current restless beneath the dark surface. The air still carried a bite, but it no longer cut through to the bone. Clara noticed it first in her own hands, no longer splitting with every task. She noticed it in Sam's sudden bursts of running through the yard, chasing shadows instead of shrinking from the cold. Jonah came in one morning with mud clinging to his boots and a cut across his palm from a rusted hinge. He dropped his hat on the peg by the door. Fencing's given way along the western slope, he said. I'll have to ride out and set it right before calving. Clara tied the string of her apron and looked up. I'll come with you. His eyes dropped to her raw hands, then lifted to the children sitting quietly at the table, brushing crumbs from Ella's primer. They'll be fine with me, Ella said before he could answer. Jonah raised a brow. You sure of that? Ella nodded solemnly. Mama showed me how to boil water, and I can keep Sam from climbing on the stove. Clara touched her daughter's shoulder. Stay inside. If you get cold or worried, hang a quilt over the door. We won't be gone long. Jonah didn't argue. He only pressed a spare pair of gloves into Clara's hands. You'll need these. That wind cuts different out there. They rode past the pasture line, the land rising into a ridge where the snow had thinned. Fence posts leaned, rails sagged, the long winter having loosened their grip. Work was slow. Jonah drove new stakes while Clara braced the old ones. They spoke only in short bursts, breath precious in the sharp air. You ever think about heading back east? Clara asked, hammering a post into place. Jonah shook his head. Too many ghosts there. The pass stays quiet out here. Clara nodded, passing him another rail. I think I've had enough of ghosts. The sun broke through for the first time in days, gold light spilling across the ridge. Clara paused, leaning against the fence, sweat dampening her collar despite the chill. "I used to think peace was sitting in church on Sunday morning," she said. "Now I think it looks like this." Jonah leaned against a post, arms folded. "Don't miss the noise, I miss knowing what day it is," she admitted, but not much else. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "You've settled in here like you were always meant to." Clara turned to face him. "I don't know what I was meant for, but I know I sleep easier now." The wind stirred the edge of her coat. After a quiet moment, he said, "You've made this place less hollow." She studied him. "Since we arrived, since you looked me in the eye and told me you didn't want pity," they stood there in the stillness, not touching, but not needing to. What had gone unsaid no longer weighed heavy. It waited, patient. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Jonah stepped outside to check the sky. Clara followed, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Stars crowded the heavens, sharp and cold. The moon hung thin and silver above the ridge. "I'm thinking of staying," she said. He didn't turn right away. "You already are. I mean, past spring, through summer, maybe longer." He nodded once, as if the words were ones he had longed to hear for years. "I'd teach," she added, "if the town will have me. I'd raise the children here, put down roots." Jonah turned then, slow and steady, gray eyes catching the starlight. "You'd have a place here," he said, "not because you owe me, or I you, but because I want you to." Clara's breath clouded in the cold. She stepped closer until she could see the faint scar above his brow. Her hand reached for his, rough palm meeting her smaller one. "I don't need promises written in stone," she said, "just someone who stays." Jonah's grip tightened gently. "I've stayed through worse," he answered. "I'll stay for you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in her life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like home. "You'd have a place here," Jonas said. His voice carried no hesitation, just plain certainty. "Not because of debt, not because I owe you a thing, but because I want you to." Clara did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, so near she could see the faint scar just above his brow. A mark the firelight never quite touched. Her hand reached for his, her palm resting against the roughness of his skin. He did not pull away. "I don't need a vow carved in stone," she whispered. "Only someone who stays." Jonah's grip tightened gently. "I've weathered worse storms than this. I'll stay for you." She let her head rest against his shoulder. For the first time in her life, silence wasn't something to fear. It felt like belonging. By early April, the land began to stir. The frozen ground softened beneath their boots. Jonah's cattle drifted into the lower pasture, noses down to fresh shoots. Clara showed Ella how to check the creek for the first signs of choke cherries pushing up through mud. Sam tagged behind with a stick, pretending he could coax spring from the banks by poking at the thaw. One late afternoon, as the light stretched long across the ridge, a rider came up the trail. He was older, gray-bearded, with a satchel slung across his chest. Dismounting stiffly, he handed Clara a folded sheet, the paper worn from travel. She opened it beneath the porch awning while the children cracked walnuts on the steps. Jonah stood nearby with a coil of rope in one hand, saying nothing, only watching her face as she read. "They'll take me," Clara said at last, folding the note with care. The Bozeman School Board wants me to start teaching in May, 3 days a week to begin. That's not far off, Jonah replied. I'll need to ride into town, meet the trustees. They'll want to see I'm capable. You'll need someone with you. That trail's still soft. If you get caught in the mud, you'll want a second horse. I can manage. I know you can, he said, but that's not the same as saying you should ride alone. She lowered the letter, looking at him. Will you come? He nodded once. I'll saddle the bay. 2 days later, they rode out together. The land had shifted with the season. Tiny leaves fluttered along the cottonwoods. Wild mustard shimmered pale against the trail. They went single file where the path narrowed. Clara's skirts caught the wind, her bonnet loose beneath her chin. Jonah said little, but when they reached the edge of town, he leaned over and brushed a leaf from her shoulder. You're ready for this, he told her. I know, she answered, her voice steady, even as nerves pricked her belly. Inside the Mercantile, the trustees waited 3 men and 1 woman seated stiffly in the back. Clara folded her hands and stood tall. They asked her questions about her experience, her reading, how she would handle boys rowdy from winter, what she would do with a child too shy to raise his voice. She answered each one plain and without pause. When it was done, she stepped outside into the crisp air, her spine straight though her stomach fluttered. Jonah was already mounting. They'll take you, he said. You don't know that. I know how you look standing in front of them. You weren't asking their leave. You were telling them what you'd do. She did not reply, but her eyes shone warmer than they had that morning. Weeks passed with a rhythm that felt like it had always belonged to them. Clara rode to town twice before May, once to fetch the schoolhouse keys, once again to collect a box of primers and chalk. Each evening, Ella practiced her reading by her mother's side, lips moving softly over the words. Sam helped Jonah oil the saddles on Sundays while chickens scattered underfoot. One morning, walking the fence line, Clara paused with her hand resting on the top rail. I've been thinking, she said. Jonah adjusted the brim of his hat. About what this land, what comes next. I want to stay, not just the children and us, all of us. Jonah turned. His expression hardly changed, but something eased in his shoulders. I've wanted that since you stepped off the wagon, he said. She reached for his hand, her grip sure. Then let's make it official. His brows lifted. I mean I want to marry you, Jonah McAllister, if you'll have me. His hand closed around hers. I'll have you for as long as I draw breath. They were wed beneath the cottonwoods behind the cabin, where the creek caught the light. Ella carried a basket of prairie crocus, blossoms bright against the gray of early spring. Sam wore one of Jonah's old shirts tied with twine at the waist, grinning like he was part of something grand. The preacher came from town and spoke plain words in a kind voice. Clara wore a dress the shade of riverstone, simple and strong. Jonah shaved for the first time since February. After the vows, they shared coffee and sweet bread on the porch. The children chased a stray dog that had wandered up that morning and never left. Clara leaned against Jonah's side, her head tucked beneath his chin. You were right, she murmured. About what? Peace. It isn't a Sunday sermon. It's this. Jonah kissed the crown of her head, and it feels like it too. Spring ripened into summer. Clara taught at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, leaving at dawn, returning by supper. Jonah fenced the north pasture and raised a small lean-to by the barn for the coming season. Sam began sleeping with his boots on, ready to leap into chores before sunup. Ella learned to ride the mare with a steady hand, her posture calm, her voice soft. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch, knees touching, a tin cup passed between them. Jonah read aloud from a book of old tales, his voice slow and even. Clara stitched by lamplight, sometimes closing her eyes and just listening. The children curled at their feet like small kittens, drifting to dreams while the fireflies came out over the pasture. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge and shadows stretched long across the field, Clara turned to him. "I thought I'd never feel safe again," she said. "You are," he answered simply. "I know, but it's more than that. I'm not just safe. I'm home." He reached for her hand, and she let him. They grew old on that land. The children grew strong and kind. Winters softened in memory, and in every quiet morning, in every fire-lit night, they chose each other again, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty of people who had already decided long ago. At its heart, this story reminds us that even in the harshest winters of life, kindness can open a door to something we thought was lost forever. Clara's journey speaks to anyone who has felt the weight of loss, the loneliness of carrying burdens alone, and the fear of trusting again. Yet through Jonah's quiet strength and her own resilience, we see that healing often comes not through grand gestures, but through small acts of decency repeated each day, offering warmth, sharing silence, given a safe place to rest. For those of us later in life, this tale offers a tender reminder it is never too late to begin again. Love can come after heartbreak. Peace can be found after storms. And sometimes, home is not a place we search for, but something we build with another soul who chooses to stay. This story teaches us that dignity, compassion, and perseverance matter more than circumstance. It encourages us to hold on to hope, because even when the world feels hollow, we may be closer than we think to finding belonging again. Thank you for spending your time with us and letting these stories touch your heart. If this tale moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world. It helps us keep bringing you stories of love, courage, and second chances on the frontier.